Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and right behind me is the portion of my wormery where I keep the oldest of my systems. The oldest of my systems are here, and then as you start working your way to the right, behind me and around the corner, is the newer and newer stuff until you get to the newest of my stuff. But today we're going to be working on some of the older stuff. And by that I mean the bin that you see right down there on the second shelf in the middle. That's the bin that's got the mixed worm population in it. And that system is currently the oldest of my systems that's still in the active composting mode. Slightly older systems, such as the ones that you see up here, are ones that are either foraging, as you see over here in these two systems back here, or these two systems over here, which have already undergone some horizontal migration and even one haul out. But I've put a little bit of a pause in the migration with these systems to enable a little bit of drying. I've got this fancy system set up here where this fan is simply blowing air across the top surface of these systems to try to promote the quicker drying of the material in the bins. But we're not here to talk about these. We're here to feed, and it is quite likely that we might actually transition the mixed red worm bin today from the active composting phase to foraging. But today is a feeding, so we're going to get this bin up onto the bench, see how they're doing, give them a little snack. So let's get to work. Well, you know, one thing I don't like to see is a dead, dried up worm. And I wonder if it's a worm that might have crept out of this system, or might have crept out of a system that was resting on a shelf above this system. I suppose there's always that possibility that that was an escapee from a system that was resting on a shelf up above and just dropped into here. But I guess when you see only one, I guess you could kind of write that off as sort of an anomaly. So the last feeding into here was 14 days ago. It's been 2 weeks since we last checked in here. We dropped in some leaves, I guess. Maybe they were lettuce or some sort of leaf. Can't remember exactly what it was, but that's what rings a bell as far as what was put in here as far as the feeding goes. And I'm definitely seeing signs of the springtails. And you only need to peel back a little bit of the material to catch a glimpse of some of these little guys. Man, they are still in here in great numbers. I don't know if it's a situation we're ever going to be able to remedy in here, unfortunately, as much as I would like to. Look at that. They certainly are busy little creatures. It does seem like all you need to do is peel back a little bit of the material to reveal even more of them. I mean, they are everywhere. I thought their numbers were sort of reducing over time gradually. It's kind of what I was actually hoping for, but it just might not really be the case. And a lot of people say just leave them be, you know. They're actually helping with the breakdown process. They're not harming the worms. They get along just fine with the worms. But you know, I don't know. It's just maybe a personal preference. And it shouldn't be much more than that. I mean, if you just didn't want to have springtails in your bin, then that should be your choice, right? I mean, it's my bin. People can run their own bins any way they like. But in my own personal preference, I'd really just rather not have quite such a huge number of springtails in the bin. They do seem to scurry out of view pretty quickly once they're exposed to the daylight, similar to what the worms tend to do. And they are everywhere. But you know, more and more over time, I've just been attempting to not let it faze me, to just let it bounce off my back and let it be, and just treat it as just what it is. This is just the way this system is for whatever reason. What I'm giving them is something that's been kind of piling up here, and I've got even more up in the kitchen. It's just coffee. And the other little tasty treat is going to be this whole peach, including mold that started growing on here. I took it out of the freezer a little while ago, so the glistening moisture on it is just the humidity in the air condensing on the cold material. So I also sometimes include a little bit of worm chow with the coffee just to make it not so boring. So I've got that on hand as well, and that's pretty much their meal today. After 14 days, I'm not expecting to see much, if any, leftovers. The one thing I was concerned with in this bin, though, considering the way it's just covered with paper, is moisture. I worried that maybe the moisture in here might have escaped through the paper-only coverings. But as you saw, there were two layers. There was the somewhat larger piece of newspaper draped over the entire top surface of the material in the bin, as well as that piece of paper bag on top. Not to mention that third layer, right? The feeding zone indicator directly over where we had last fed. And I'm glad to say that the moisture level over here in the feeding zone has been quite well protected from evaporation, because it's nice and moist and damp and cozy and cool, and the worms seem to be doing quite well in it. They seem quite happy. Normally I'm expecting the worms to just retreat out of view into the bedding after I've disturbed the material and unearthed a whole bunch of them due to the bright lights overhead, and it's always a little confusing to me why you always end up with one or two worms that just insist on going the opposite way, like this little guy over here. He came all the way up here before finally realizing that it's just so dry out here that he's probably better off making his way back into the bed. But then there's also this little itsy bitsy tiny one. It's these little ones that I worry about, because their moisture content, if you will, was that one or two? Maybe there was two, or maybe there was one on my glove already. Well, whatever the case may be. Little guys like these I worry about, because it almost seems like they can just almost like flash dry out on a dry surface, whereas maybe a slightly larger worm has, a good amount of moisture content to their body and is somewhat protected from that happening just by nature of their size. But a little guy like that seems like they could be at risk of, drying up. So I worry about those that crawl up, that are little puny ones like that, and I want to help them back down into the bed as quickly as possible. So now before we plop in the foods, I was contemplating whether perhaps in a bin that's this old now, 330 plus days of age, some of those systems over there behind me that you noticed were already in the process of either foraging or migration, are also kind of in that same age range. So this system too is probably due to get geared up for harvest one of these days soon, or at least switched over from active composting to foraging. But I guess that's a decision I'll make at some point in the future, maybe even retroactively making this the final feeding. So I don't know, we'll have to play it by ear. So yeah, I don't know, we'll have to see. So I guess I did want to at least try to provide them with a feeding which could easily get pulled out if there were leftovers, such as that peach. I'm assuming the fruit will get eaten pretty quickly, but the pit will obviously be extracted at some point before these castings can be harvested. And even down to the bedding that I use, I didn't want to add any more of this shredded paper. There's quite a bit of it left over from previous check-ins, but I figured maybe, like, I've got this coffee filter here. It's not the one that was draped out as our feeding zone indicator. It's another one that I believe I removed it from one of the systems that's over there foraging right now, and it's actually two coffee filters. I imagine that somewhat larger chunks of material like this, again for the same reason, could possibly just get extracted whole if they didn't all get broken down, and removed if we decided it was time to try to harvest the castings in here. So yeah, we're gonna just treat that piece of paper down there as, you know, the bedding. And it just feels like I'm going to have a piece of fruit sticking out above the surface. So I think for that main reason, I'm going to kind of squish it so that it can actually get covered completely. It's a piece of fruit like this that would definitely attract a lot of pests, I think. You know, little fruit flies, possibly even sneaking through the screen windows to get at access to something like this. And I guess even now we've managed to pretty completely extract this pit. So I believe I'll simply exclude it now proactively. And you know, I'm even wondering if perhaps we can use some of this. No, you know, I think we'll just try to use the existing materials surrounding the peach to try to cover it up. But you know, another good material that could be used to mask scent. I learned this on those cops TV shows and on crime TV series. Evidently, drug runners use coffee as a material to mask the odor of drugs from drug sniffing dogs at the border and stuff like that. So perhaps the coffee will work equally well here to prevent the delicious odor of that peach from wafting into the air and attracting pests. So we'll see if that helps here. I hope it does, because I'd hate to come back in here and find just a massive amount of fruit flies buzzing around trying to get access to that piece of fruit. Onto the coffee, I'm sprinkling some of my worm chow, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes I'll even blend it in a little bit just to try to make that stuff a little bit more interesting. This stuff is relatively dry, so hopefully the peach brings with it a little bit of extra moisture. The worm chow is also a dry food substance. And then hopefully the surrounding material too brings with it enough moisture to keep things comfortable over here for the worms. I'd hate to think that, you know, we're creating a feeding zone that's consisting of materials that are just a little bit overly dry and inhospitable for worms to approach, because then basically the stuff will sit there untouched. Although, you know, I gotta admit, it's hard to imagine that peach sitting there untouched. I think the worms are gonna go for it, if you ask me. And I am actually mounding up stuff pretty thick over here. All right, once again, I'm just going to leave a few moments for these worms to retreat down into the bed, and then we can continue. Alright, so now before we cover things up and put everything away, just a quick comment here in case anyone's wondering about the arrangement of things in this container, because some of you might be questioning, hey, isn't this thing actually already set up for horizontal migration, where you're feeding on the edge and trying to lure the worms out of their finished compost? Well, it is very similar. The arrangement definitely looks exactly the way you would normally be running a system if you were trying to, you know, get the material geared up for harvest and the worms set up on one edge of the bin for haul out. But some people actually run their systems like this from the very start, or at least soon after the start. They start their worm bins, and once there's an accumulation of fairly broken down materials, they'll start moving that broken down material to one edge and then feeding only on one end of the bin, the opposite end of the bin from where the broken down materials are. And then they kind of treat that as a perpetually running not a machine, but a system, which doesn't have like a defined end at which point you haul the worms out and harvest the castings and then clean out the bin and start anew, but rather you just continuously keep on scooping finished material out, harvesting it without bringing the system to an end, and then, you know, always continuing to put fresh feedings and supplying the worms with additional stuff on the opposite end, creating just a perpetually running system, one that never really needs to be considered as having a start or a finish per se. So we actually consciously did set this one system of mine up to be run that way. Normally I do run my systems with a defined start point and end point with a harvest, at which point I do empty the bin and start it anew. And here it just seemed like we had an opportunity to try running the system in this sort of continuous flow pattern or wedge pattern. Different people have different names for it. So the continuous flow is, I guess, meant to describe how it's a continuous system with no beginning or end, and the flow portion of the name, continuous flow, is just the flowing of the material from not quite or not broken down whatsoever to completely broken down and ready to be scooped out and taken away. And at that point you're assuming that, you know, the material that is fully broken down and harvestable is also free of any worm traffic, because the worms are theoretically over on the side of the bin where all the action is with the food and everything. So I've leveled things off. Previously we had been running things a little bit more kind of tapered off so that the feeding end was a little bit more shallow and all the finished castings were piled up high. But I have leveled things off here pretty much. And I'm kind of at that decision point here, you know, do we treat this as the final feeding? Maybe, I don't know. Do we continue on? I really don't know what to do about the springtails. I'd really love to see them gone, but I guess gradually, perhaps based on just all the feedback I've been getting from the viewers, to ignore it or to not be bothered by it. But I guess it's just my personal preference. Like I mentioned earlier, I would prefer to see a system that doesn't have, you know, a whole bunch of stuff living in it other than the worms. Naturally, there's always those additional helper bin critters in your system that are there to help, mites, springtails, whatever you might have in your bin. But when they start getting to the numbers that you see here, it just kind of goes against what I prefer personally. So that's just what it is. All right, everyone, that's the end of our check-in with the mixed worm population. This was feeding number 28, I believe, and we're somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 332 days of age. I don't recall exactly, but it's up there. And, you know, getting the thing geared up for harvest and possibly relocating the worms to a new home is definitely something that we could potentially decide to do one of these days. Please let me know what you think. I'd love to hear everyone's input on their comments. And hopefully, if you enjoyed the video, please also give me a quick like. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.